And welcome. And thank you all for joining us for our art demo and lecture with Maria Cecilia Freeman, who I'm joined with today. My name is Marisa Gomez, and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History. And I'm going to share my screen now so that we can go through just a couple of kind of like logistical notes before I hand it over for the main event. So today we're going to be watching Maria at work, and you can share your questions through the chat. Like I said, mics are disabled for now, but maybe at the end we'll allow you guys to unmute so that you can ask questions directly of Maria. The program is being recorded, and we'll be making that available on our website when we finish. And I know we have many people joining us from our local Santa Cruz, California region, but also some people probably joining from other parts of the country or even the world today. And so I'd love it if we can get started by just in the chat, if you could share, like say hello by sharing where it is that you're tuning in from. And I can get us started by saying hello from Santa Cruz, California. There we go. So yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. And also I gather that probably some of you have never been to the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History before. So I thought I'd also take a moment to just briefly share a little bit about us. We are Santa Cruz's first museum, founded in 1905 after lighthouse keeper Laura Hecox deeded her massive collection of shells, fossils, and curios to the city of Santa Cruz. And this is Laura here in her signature petticoat on Westcliff Drive. We're very proud of our founder. And we are now a fully independent nonprofit organization located in the Seabright neighborhood of Santa Cruz, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Yupi tribe of the Awaswas Nation. Today, these lands are stewarded by the Amamutsin tribal band, who are working hard to fulfill their obligation to Creator to care for and steward Mother Earth and all living things through relearning efforts and the Amamutsin Land Trust. And these are members of the Land Trust here. And after having been closed for a little over a year, we're excited to welcome visitors back for our 33rd year of exhibiting science illustration through our exhibit, The Art of Nature, which is now on view. And for the first year ever, we are presenting the exhibit both on site at the museum with the original works of art and online in the form of a virtual exhibit. So even for those of you joining us today from far away, you can enjoy the dozens of pieces of artwork on display from afar, including the works of today's speaker, Maria Cecilia Freeman, also known as Cissy. And she gardens, paints, and teaches in Aptos, California, which is in Santa Cruz County, where she finds or grows many of her plant subjects. Her rose studies, watercolors, and drawings have appeared in solo exhibitions in Italy at the Horticultural Society of New York and at the San Francisco Botanical Garden. Her work has been included in juried exhibitions in the US and Europe and numerous publications. She's a member of the Northern California Society of Botanical Artists and the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Maria to show us what she does. And again, use the chat to share your questions throughout, and I'll relay anything that you are burning to know more about in the moment. I'll relay it to Maria.
Okay. Thank you, Marissa. That was a nice introduction. And I've been seeing names flash by that I see many friends who are rose people and artists, and my family far flung in lots of different places. I'm so pleased to see all of you. So I'm going to talk about how I get to know a rose in order to draw and paint it. I'll show you some examples of work and do some demonstration of a rose that I haven't actually painted. So it'll be, a whole new experience. Botanical art has goals that are twofold. On the one hand, the historical goal has been to document a plant and to share information with viewers about the details of a plant, and then on the other hand, to create a beautiful picture. So we have standards of accuracy on the one hand and aesthetics, beauty on the other. Some botanical art tends more towards the aesthetic, and then some botanical art or illustration tends more towards scientific illustration. And when I draw and paint a rose, I really I aim for both goals because, well, I love roses, but I love the botany of it too. And I think that the beauty in a rose lies in much more than the pretty flower, in the details of its leaves and prickles and the hips. And that's the kind of thing that I'm going to be going through today. I have a question. Marissa, on my screen, I see you on the big screen.
Yeah, that's just a Zoom setting thing.
Okay.
Everyone else sees who's speaking, or they either see a gallery view, and you can, for people watching, you can change that up at the top
Okay.
right where it says view.
Okay, that's fine. Well, I'm not going to keep speaking, except that I'm now going to share my screen while I speak, and I've got to adjust my window here a little bit. Okay. Oh no, before I do that, I wanted to show you my Rosa californica, which is the first one we're going to talk about. Here's Rosa californica. At my old house, I had a big thicket of this rose, and I drew and painted it when I had. Now I'm trying to start a new thicket where I live, and I could see already that this is Rosa californica because I recognize the pattern in the leaves and the leaflets and the prickles, and we'll look at that. Okay, when I wanted to draw and paint Rosa californica, in order to do this portrait, which I did probably 12 years ago, and it does have many details, you see. It's trying to show a lot of the botanical details of the plant, the front of the leaves and the reverse of the leaves and so forth. But to do that, first I did a lot of drawings. And this is like a collage. These are literally on tracing paper and all stuck together. And I was making observations of all the details that I had to understand in order to do an accurate painting of this rose. So for example, the leaves, there are usually 5 to 7 leaflets in the leaf of Rosa californica. They're sessile, meaning that these leaflets don't have a little side stem of their own, and the shape is oval or ovate. They have pointy tips. The margins are important to observe. So the leaf margins are serrate, they're toothed, or sometimes, it's not always consistent, they have a little double tooth, biserrate. The prickles on the stems are flattened and they curve down. Sometimes they're paired at the nodes.
Is that a technical term, prickles, like as opposed to thorns?
Yes.
I had not heard that before. I like it better.
Roses have prickles. They don't have thorns. And I hope I'm going to get this right. It's because the prickle is an outgrowth of the epidermis. whereas a thorn on another kind of plant is a modified branch.
That's
And
fascinating.
somebody can correct me if I got that wrong, but roses do have prickles. Um, I measured the flower. A typical size flower was 4.5 centimeters. And here's a fun part. I went to decide how to get the color right on the flowers, and I annotated the colors that I used: quinacridone magenta, some permanent carmine in the opening bud, which was darker. I also annotated the colors of the leaves, that I used a Hansa yellow and indigo. And here's an important thing this is going to be a recurring observation, that to get the color of the leaf accurate, I had to add a hint, just a touch of permanent rose, which was the flower color, into the older foliage. I mean, into the green, to get the accurate color of the older foliage. I observed that the hips, these bright red hips, were round or sometimes oval, and they tended to have a distinct little neck under the sepals, which persisted. That is, they stayed attached. Now, with a wild rose, this is the California wild rose, there's a lot of variation regionally and among different groups, but this was observations of the one I had. So learning these botanical details applies not just to working with a wild rose, but also to painting a garden rose. So here's a picture from 2 days ago of Fortune's double yellow in my garden, and it's past its prime, but you can see that there's a lot of variation in the range of color in those flowers. And also that this is certainly not a wild rose. This is a garden rose. It's one that was discovered, so to speak, by Robert Fortune, who was a plant explorer and collector in 1844, I think. Yeah, and brought to England. I love this rose, and I did a painting of it, which was tricky because there's a lot of variation in the color in those flowers. But in order to do that, first I did a lot of drawings again. I picked out the colors for the leaves, the watercolors. This is all watercolor, I should have said that. To get the leaf color, and I noted that the number of leaflets, there are 5 to 7 leaflets, and that they are sort of long ovals, pointy on the end, shiny, and the margins, that is the edges of the leaves, tend to be wavy and widely serrate, that is, they have wide teeth on the outer half of the leaf. So they're smooth for a while, and then on the outer portion of the leaf, they are widely serrate. And these are the sorts of observations that I make to do an accurate painting. The receptacle, that is this guy that's going to become the hip under the roundish bud, is smooth and shiny. At the base of the leaf is the stipule, that is typical of roses. And the stipule is something to be observed because it may be fat or long and skinny, like in this case, it's linear. And the auricles, which are these pointy ends, they're pointy and they spread out, they're divergent. The petiole, that is the stem of the leaf, which is over here, And the rachis, the center stem of the leaf with the leaflets attached, has small red falcate prickles on the underside. And over here, I drew those prickles that are many sharp falcate pointing downwards like that on the twiggy stems, and that they're red at first. The hips is hard to find a hip for this rose, but I found a couple, and they are subglobose, that is not quite round. The
Why is that
flowers,
that there would be some roses that it's easier to find the hips than others?
that is the case. Some cultivars don't set hips as regularly. That varies.
Mm.
There's a lot of variation in hips, rose hips, so that's something that has to be observed for the painting. Petals, the shape of the petals, and the fact that they're creamy yellow at the base and pink on the outside, but there's a range of colors. So I tried to capture that here when I was getting the colors, the watercolors that I was going to use. Some of them are more yellow, some of the petals with a flush of pink on the outer margin, and some are pinker, but there is an underlying yellow. And this variation can be observed on the same plant or on different plants. So this is a collection of observations. It's not random, and sometimes I was afraid of overlooking something that I was later going to want to know, so I made myself a checklist. I'm not going to bring it up here, but Marissa's going to make it available to you after this presentation. It's a checklist that is a reminder to me of the kinds of observations I want to make about a rose in order to illustrate it. So it's observations about the stems, their surface and color, about prickles, about the leaves, about the stipules, the number of leaflets, the shape, the margins, the edges of the leaves, and on flowers, and the sepals that are at the base of the flower here. Sometimes these sepals are sort of feathery and have side projections, and sometimes they are what you call entire, that is, they have smooth margins like this.
And
I'm
we have a
using,
question from Danny about your process for creating this composition. Did you use like individual like tracing paper drawings to then
yeah,
compose this? Yeah, okay.
yeah, that's an important question. When I did Rosa Californica, this was 12 years ago. First of all, I always draw from a live plant specimen. Obviously, this kind of observations cannot be done with photographs. I have the live plant, and I do a lot of drawings on tracing paper. The reason to do it on there's several reasons to do it on tracing paper. One is that it's the tracing paper I prefer. It's a really good surface for graphite, and it erases readily, and it's really low stakes drawing. You don't have to get it right, you just draw it over again. And I draw many times a flower or the leaves. And at this stage, when I did Rosa Californica, I collected all those pieces of tracing paper and literally cut them up with scissors and cut out the pieces of drawings and arranged them on a large piece of paper in what seemed like a pretty and also coherent arrangement and added color in. And I just glued them down to make a collage. When I did Fortune's Double Yellow, which was, I don't know, a few years ago, instead of cutting up the tracing paper and gluing it on, I used a light box and I arranged the tracing paper drawings under my watercolor paper and traced them in the arrangement I wanted here. I traced them onto the watercolor paper and then added watercolor where I wanted to. So there's a lot more to be said about the process, but I hope that answers the question. Notice here that in Fortune's Double Yellow again, when I mixed the green of the leaves, the medium green, I added a touch of permanent rose to the green mixture to get the mature leaf color right. Permanent rose is one of the colors, quinacridone rose, and permanent rose with New Gamboge yellow. Here, this doesn't look like New Gamboge, but on the camera, but it was, and a little bit of ultramarine blue to create the shadow colors. But the point is that a bit of the flower color is mixed into the leaf color. And I think that's a nice thing to think about, that a plant, a rose, has its own inner harmony in the colors. And I'm going to do that in a minute with this rose that's on my desk. So there's a very limited palette. Here there's about 4 colors. And the flower color and the hip color and the leaf color are all affecting each other. Now I'm going to drop that for a minute, and I'm going to go to my desk, my work table here. Okay, so we're at my work table. And before I get into that, I'll show you that is my sound still okay? Because I've moved away.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm going to see if I can show it to you effectively under the camera. This is a flower opening of Monsieur Tillier. And this is a garden rose that was developed by Vernet in 1891 in France. And I've never drawn or painted this rose. And I'm going to show you now, I hope it's going to work, how I picked the palette for this rose and do a little painting of it. I mean, parts, make some observations and do some drawings. I also have the big blousy flower of the same rose, Monsieur Tillier, and this a comment for my rose friends who are out there who might be thinking, is this Archduke Joseph, another French rose from 1892? And I will say that I bought this as Monsieur Tillier. I'm not 100% certain. And that would be something you can tell me what you think later. But the point I'm going to use it to show you how I observe the colors and tackle this as a kind of complex, very complex subject. The leaves, they look a little darker. Let's see if I can change the exposure. They're a pretty deep green. They look blackish on the camera. They're really not that dark. But the young growth, the young leaves, have a lot of red in them, a lot of these colors in the leaves. And then I was able to find a little hip from last year. So all of this material gives me what I need to see in order to choose the palette for this rose. And I'm not going to begin at the beginning because it takes a little while, but this is what I did last couple of days. Yesterday, basically, I did a lot of experimenting, and this is the process. I did some experimenting. This one, I tried azo yellow, and the way I picked azo yellow, I'll show you. Here's a petal that I pulled out, and at the base of this old petal is a pretty bright yellow. Okay, there's a pretty bright yellow, and that's a straightforward color. So I picked an azo yellow to start with, which is a mid-range watercolor yellow. And I know that that yellow is underlying the reds, the rose colors in that leaf. That yellow is also underlying the colors in the hips. And it's also underlying the green in the leaves. So I wanted to choose a blue that would give me that leaf color. I tried ultramarine blue, Prussian blue, Indian throne blue I settled on because mixing Indian throne blue with azo yellow gets me pretty close to the color of these leaves. When I look at the petals, the yellow is a start, and they range just in, from the young flower to the older flower, and that older flower, as it gets even older, the color is going to shift. And so I knew I needed more than one pink. I tried alizarin crimson, and when it's put down in a very pale wash here, it's a good match for the paler parts of the petal. I chose a more violet color, which is quinacridone violet, to do the bluer tones as the petal ages. And I know that when I do the hip, it's going to have a lot of that bluer violet in it. So by this experimenting, I came up with a palette of 4 colors for this rose. I have azo yellow, that's Indian throne blue. Artists out there, this is Daniel Smith, Indian throne blue. It's the same pigment, pigment blue 60 as M. Graham's anthraquinone blue. This is permanent alizarin crimson from Winsor Newton. This is M. Graham quinacridone violet. Now, a live demo like this is always very risky. It would be much safer if I had recorded this ahead of time and knew it was going to work. But when you do it live, If it doesn't work, it's still interesting. But that's part of the real process, isn't it? So I'm going to get my brushes over here. This is the biggest brush I'm going to use. This is a number 2 of Raphael Kunze 8408 series, which is a very pointy, small brush. I will later, when I get to veins, use a teeny brush. This is a Winsor Newton miniature brush, 00. So let's, this is an atomizer with water. Let's get some azo yellow and some Indian blue and a little more azo yellow. I like using just a plain plate for a palette because I can do this. I can just pull paint from different directions. And that gives me a green. This is a little watery. It gives me a green that's very close to that.
And that was just using 2 colors, right?
That's using just Indian blue and azo yellow.
Yeah. Carmel was wondering if you always use such a limited amount of colors when you paint. Does that have to do with the selection of watercolors that you have to choose from?
I have a zillion tubes of watercolor. But the answer is yes. For any given plant, I find there's a limited palette, and you want to paint with that limited palette once you discover what it is, because then you get the harmony of color that fits that plant. You don't want to be drawing in lots of other colors once you know what they are. I'm adding a bit of alizarin crimson into this green mix.
Could you move the plate up just a little bit too?
What I did was pull a touch of alizarin crimson over to my green and mixed it in. So now I have 3 colors here, a Indian blue, azo yellow, and a bit of permanent alizarin crimson. And that gives me a good green for the leaf. It may not show perfectly. No, it doesn't, because the leaf looks so dark on the camera, but it is the right color. I'm going to try altering the exposure here. It didn't help a whole lot, but it lightened up a bit.
Yeah, and I think you can tell that it's the appropriate tone, even if the color isn't translating exactly accurately.
Yeah, this is a lighter value, but it's the right colors. So here again, it's a blue and a yellow and a touch of the petal color. I started some drawings just to kind of get a jump on the process to show you. I took a petal and drew it, and I won't have time to go through the whole process. And besides, it would require us to sit here and watch the paint dry. Because the first step to do this petal is to give it a wash of plain water. And then I took a very dilute wash of azo yellow. That's not so dilute. And I'm bringing it up this far on the petal because the outer part of the petal isn't so yellow. The outer part of the petal, I'm taking a bit of alizarin crimson and getting a dilute wash to put on the outer part of the petal. And when you paint rose petals, you want to be always working with the direction of the veins in the petal. Because the veins of a rose petal are what make it so much fun to paint roses. So that's the early stage. That has to dry completely. I jumped ahead over here with a little additional layer of the rose and the alizarin crimson. I'm going to wet this and on my palette I'm taking a bit of the quinacridone violet and a teeny touch of Indian throne blue. It's giving me almost a purpley color. And I'm going to drop that in to indicate the shadow, to create a shadow. And I'm pulling it down, the paint down in the direction of veins. I'm going to leave that to dry and go to a leaf. So a leaf, I started with a wash here of a pale wash of dilute azo yellow. And I did the whole leaf that way. I did this one the same. Then I put a thin wash of the green color, the mixture of Indian throne blue and azo yellow on these. And then I began working section by section with a slightly darker mix of the green of this leaf. The light's coming this way, so the shadow, it's casting a shadow at each vein. I'm going to pull in a bit of the a bit of blue and violet into my green mix to get a shadow color. Is that showing up that I'm putting a darker? Yeah, creating a shadow at the veins. And then you might wonder, what's this here? I'm leaving that out as some highlight. I have to turn it over to get a good clean line along the mid vein. That's a step in the process of painting the leaf. There will be numerous more layers to go on there. So we're still working with just the 4 colors. Hips are always fun to paint. I put first a layer, a thin wash of azo yellow, because I know there's yellow on that hip. And I put in a thin dilute wash of quinacridone magenta over here with a little blue. And with hips, you can get a little wild and crazy about how you just drop paint in on them. So I'll do a little bit of that. I'm putting in a bit of alizarin crimson there, smoothing out the edges of that color. And over here, now that it's moist, I like doing this kind of wet in wet. I'm mixing some indanthrone blue with quinacridone magenta over here and getting a dark violet to drop in here at this darkest point of this hip. Creating, there we go, shadow over here. And when that's dry, we don't want it to end up purple. When it's dry, I can go back and paint our pinky color, the alizarin crimson, over it. I'm going to do one more thing. Whoops, running out of time. I just want to show you about veins, because it's one of the things you want to observe. When you draw and paint a rose, whatever the orientation of the petal is, the veins all come out from the base. They don't branch up here. They all emanate from the base. And when you paint a rose, you can use those veins to indicate the shape of your petal. And the veins sometimes show that the edge of the petal is folding over. And the last touch on here is that the very base of the petal has a good bright yellow. Right, with more time and more layers of color, that would get darker and brighter. I did a couple just experimentally as part of testing out my palette here. And
I've had issues when I play with watercolors where I kind of feel like I'm ruining the paper the more I play with it. Do you have any advice for how to effectively add these layers upon layers upon layers in a way that doesn't kind of get it all muddled?
yeah, the key is to let it dry completely. See, this isn't yet quite dry, but I can already add another layer very lightly on top of the color that I already put down. And the color, that's the beauty of watercolor. The color that's underneath is showing through the transparent layer of alizarin crimson that I just put on. But I've got to leave it alone and let it dry. Because if it's not entirely dry, then you're going to start lifting up the paint that's underneath.
I am not the most patient of people. That must be my issue.
Well, this is a slow process. Before we run out of time, and if you have questions about, well, this is a very truncated demonstration of, something that actually takes a lot of time. But I'm going to go back to just a couple more pictures.
And what paper do you use? It's a
I
question
use
for
a lot of
Morgan.
different papers. This one is probably Arch 440 pound hot press. It's got to be hot press. Here we go. Hot press is the smoothest paper. So for botanical work, you want the smoothness because of the tiny details. Sometimes I like to combine, to come back to California native roses, which is really a primary interest of mine. I like to combine the painting itself, the portrait, with the observations into one composition, which is sort of unconventional, but I really like it. So this is Rosa spithamia, and this one I think is in the show currently at the museum. Rosa spithamia is a fire-adapted native species in California, and after the fires that went through Bonnie Doon a few years ago, I found Rosa spithamia popping up. This little plant was growing out of a gravel road. So I took it home and painted it while I had it. And the same kinds of observations. The leaf margins, in this case, are biserrate. The stipule, the margins are gland ciliate. They have little tiny necked glands on them. It changes color. It's painted the actual size. It only grows about 1 foot tall. Again, the colors, the hypanthium, the calyx under the bud and the flower is glandular, has these little tiny red glands sticking out on it. The prickles are straight and needle-like. Sometimes it's easy to think that these wild roses all look alike, but from what we just looked at, this is Rosa minutifolia, the Baja rose or small-leafed rose. This hypanthium has prickles all over it, red prickles. And when the bud is forming, the prickles are underneath and at the base of the sepals. These sepals are fancy. They have projections on the sides. There's the color. Again, the green has a touch of the petal color in it. These minutifolia, as the name suggests, the leaves are really tiny. These are, of course, it's blown up on the screen, but they're um, drawn and painted life size. And I was surprised at the size of the flower compared to Rosa spithamia. Uh, I checked the accuracy of my observations. This is an important point. I went to the Jepson manual, the Bible of California flora, which is online at, it's from Berkeley, the Jepson Herbarium at Berkeley. So it's UCJeps at berkeley.edu. It's
Yeah,
an
I can
e-flora.
include that link too in our follow-up email along with
Yes,
the
that would be
handout.
good. The e-flora, I still use the book
Yeah.
that some of us carried around in the woods that's 4 inches thick and weighs about 50 pounds. That I consult it for descriptions of these native roses. And that it in fact confirmed to me that the flower of Rosa minutifolia, small as its leaves are, is larger than the flower of Rosa spithamia. There are 9 native roses in California. And I would love to be able to find and draw and paint all 9 of them. I don't know that I can because some of them are in very restricted habitats, but these have been fun. And I think that
Is
I've
that,
used my time.
are those 3 that you've shared, the minutifolia, the spithamia, and the californica, are those the main 3 that you see or that you've studied?
No, there's some others like gymnocarpa. Rosa gymnocarpa is common. It's in the woods right across the street from me in the forest of Nicene Marks. Of course, I can't go in and carry it out of the state park. I would like to do that. It's common around, in a lot of our parks. There's Rosa pinitorum, Rosa pinitorum. The only place I know that it is at Año Nuevo State Park, but I haven't seen it there. Some of them are, hard to find.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I was looking up about spithamia, the fire following rose, which is so cool, is that, yeah, oftentimes it just goes unnoticed for years and it's not until
Yeah.
after a fire because it's there, but you have to know it by its leaves, and which
Yeah.
can be difficult for identifying. Do you think that we'll be seeing more of that species in the wake of the CZU lightning complex fires then?
Yes, probably so if people go looking for it.
And where would we look for that? Where it's a good habitat?
In disturbed places, like at the edge of woods where the sun hits. The one that I found in Bonnie Doon was coming out of gravel, as I said.
Yeah. And is its bloom period, does it depend on
I don't
when maybe the
remember.
fire happens?
Yeah. I don't remember. Yeah.
I thought that I might also make it so that participants have the ability to unmute too. So if anyone watching, if you have a question for Maria that you'd like to ask like verbally, you can chime in too, or go like this, or however you want to go about it. I know someone asked for more specific details about your paints, and you mentioned a couple of brands. Do you have anything more to
Yeah.
share about?
Yes. On my palette, whoops. I have 3 brands on my palette, and with experience, you develop some preferences for different colors with different brands. I have the yellow and the blue. The Azo yellow and the Indian throne blue are both from Daniel Smith. Although I kind of like the anthraquinone blue. That's the equivalent from M. Graham. My this messy one down here is quinacridone magenta. That's from M. Graham. And if you know any of you M. Graham paints, they're made with honey and they never dry and they jump off the palette at you. but they're beautiful paints to use. The alizarin crimson is from Winsor Newton, and it's important that it's a permanent alizarin crimson because the traditional alizarin crimson was not light fast.
Hmm.
Different brands.
And Jeannie, you said you have at least two. Were you speaking of the Spithamia? Is that the?
No, I have wood roses in the backyard that have volunteered over the years, Rosa gymnocarpa. So I was telling Cissy that if she wants to come up and look or take one, I'm happy to dig one up for her.
A gymnocarpa? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you?
Boulder Creek.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice to do.
And Elaine just shared that you can purchase that at nurseries too.
Oh,
It's gotten,
if you can.
Yeah.
Is it possible?
it's gotten harder to find California native roses in nurseries because some of them have folded, like Native Revival in Aptos is now only online, and they have like $150 minimum purchase. That's where I got Rosa minutifolia, which is from Baja California. In past years when that nursery was still thriving.
Do you know if Central Coast Wilds carries native
Yes,
roses? They do.
they do, and that's where I got this.
Yeah.
And I had to buy 5 of them in order to get it because they also are, for large scale projects.
Right.
Central Coast Wilds in Santa Cruz. So they have a high minimum purchase as well.
Yeah, Elaine, did you have something to share?
Oh, just that I have 2 really large bushes of Rosa californica, if Maria is interested.
Got
Yeah,
lots
thank
of
you.
offers for you.
Yeah. And last year, the one had about 1,000 honeybees. It was great.
I'm curious about this dynamic of the heritage roses versus the native roses, and specifically, like Maria, for your perspective in California and loving both, is there, what's the attitude towards the rose people about our native roses, or is there universal love for all species, and what kind of defines a heritage rose?
What defines a heritage rose? Jill?
She's still here. We lost Jill. She would have been a good one to ask.
There are technical. Anita, are you here?
No, no,
Okay.
Anita.
There are technical definitions, but the interesting thing to me is the old roses that have played a role in the hybridization and development of modern roses. So if you go to Home Depot, you're going to see hybrid teas that have been bred for various, usually flower related characteristics. But back in the 19th century, there were a whole range of several different classes of roses developed that have contributed to the development of our modern roses. And I find them interesting. And one thing that is not a part of drawing and painting a rose is fragrance, which is so important. And some of the old roses are especially fragrant.
I suppose you could write a note of that on your full composition. And I guess with heritage roses or roses that are bred or cultivated, is there a resource similar to the Jepson manual for those types of cultivars?
Yes, there are. I have a whole library of, I have a couple of big shelves full of books on different classes of old roses. And some of them have detailed descriptions although a lot of these roses don't have detailed descriptions, which makes this kind of, drawing and painting interesting and important. But I do consult any place I can find a description because it helps me know what to look out for. And, I couldn't, and I don't have a list.
Uh-huh. But I love what you said about like why your work is important, because when there's a deficit in the information that's out there, or the the way that information is organized or displayed, like that's one of the main purposes for science illustration historically too, is that it's a way for us to better understand our natural world and kind of classify things and be able to aid in identification and kind of like set the standard, I suppose, too. You were also noting, like, is this Baja rose just like a fluke, or was the flower really that big? And the illustrations generally, right, kind of display the typical version of what you might see.
This is a role of science illustration and painting, botanical art, is to make real and accessible the information about the botanical details of a plant, not just a rose, but of plants, which is more alive than a short paragraph of text.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I just wanted to share too, before we let everyone go, that again, Maria's featured in our exhibition of science illustration at the Museum of the Art of Nature. I'm going to be sharing a link in my follow-up email so you can learn more about that exhibit and explore the virtual exhibit. We also are having another event for this series in support of the exhibit. And I'm going to share my screen so that you can see. It's this Saturday. So for those of you who are local, if you'd like to meet more of the artists from the show, we're going to have 8 of them outside doing demos. So if you enjoyed watching Maria at work, you can watch other artists from the show at work. And it's going to be 11 to 3 this Saturday. And it's also the first day of Museum Month in Santa Cruz. And we're going to be offering free admission to the museum all month long. So it's a great time to come by and enjoy some beautiful art. And we also have other events coming up in this series as well, included like guided field experiences and lectures. So we hope to see more of you. And thank you for those of you who are joining us from far, far away. And yeah, thanks for being here. We'll let you get back to your days. And thank you so much, Maria, for sharing your art with us, your insights. It was so mesmerizing to watch you at work.
My pleasure. And I thank you to everybody for coming.